He sat down at the negotiation table, ready to sign what looked like the perfect deal, until he spotted one deadly clause. "Excuse me, but this clause is a trap," the black man said, and the CEO's confident smile vanished in an instant. What happened next changed everything. Stay tuned. The glass doors whispered shut behind him as Malcolm Reid stepped into the high-rise conference room of Orvani Tech Global. It was all chrome, clean lines, and curated modern art, the kind of room designed to intimidate, to remind visitors exactly who had the power. But Malcolm wasn't here to be impressed. He was here to protect what was his. 14 executives turned toward him as he entered. Some nodded politely. Others didn't bother hiding their confusion. He wasn't what they expected. Dark-skinned, mid-30s, wearing a tailored navy suit that spoke of quiet confidence, Malcolm walked with the posture of a man who had nothing to prove. And that unsettled them more than arrogance ever could. At the far end of the table sat Harrison Locke, the platinum-haired CEO known for charm on camera and sharp elbows behind closed doors. Harrison rose with a practiced smile, extending his hand. "Mr. Reid, we've heard a lot about you," he said, the smile almost managing to reach his eyes. "I trust everything in the contract looks satisfactory?" Malcolm shook his hand firmly, then calmly took his seat without answering. From his leather briefcase, he pulled out a red-marked contract and a thin, gray folder. No tablet, no AI assistant, just paper. That made some executives smirk. This was supposed to be a formality. The acquisition had already made headlines. A young startup, VisionSpan, had developed a revolutionary AI model. Orvani Tech wanted it, and everyone assumed the final meeting would be a rubber stamp. What they didn't realize was that VisionSpan had brought in a ghost, Malcolm Reid. Former NASA strategist. Yale Law graduate. A man who once negotiated cross-continental data treaties and then vanished from the public eye. And now, here he was, not pitching, not pleading, but listening. The small talk faded. Slides were presented. Financials flashed across holograms. Words like synergy and equity partnership filled the room. Everyone relaxed again. The game was in motion. But Malcolm said nothing. He let them talk. He let them assume. Until, 35 minutes into the meeting, as Harrison began reciting the standard closing lines. "We're excited for this partnership. The language is fairly standard." Malcolm looked up, slid the contract forward, tapped a single clause with his pen, and said 4 words that instantly froze the room. "Excuse me, but this..." He paused. "This clause is a trap." And just like that, the CEO's smile cracked. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. A trap. The room, moments ago filled with curated confidence and corporate banter, fell eerily quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning now, the only sound in a room full of powerful people who suddenly felt off balance. CEO Harrison Locke blinked slowly, caught between confusion and irritation. He leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers, and gave Malcolm a patronizing half-smile. "Come again?" he asked, his tone dipped in disbelief, as if Malcolm had misread a font or overreacted to a typo. But Malcolm didn't flinch. He sat calmly, shoulders square, expression unreadable. He wasn't performing. He wasn't bluffing. He was diagnosing. "I said," he repeated, tapping the line again, "this clause is a trap." To Malcolm, it was clear. Section 7.4b, phrased innocuously enough, would redirect a significant share of VisionSpan's future revenues through a licensing structure that favored Orvani Tech indefinitely. A lifetime siphon. Hidden behind phrases like strategic continuity and brand integration. Slippery, sophisticated, and dangerous. The executives began flipping through their copies. Some nodded at each other, silently reassuring themselves it was boilerplate, standard lingo in these deals. But Malcolm wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for truth. And the truth was, this clause had been inserted late, after red lines, buried deep, phrased to slide under radar. This language wasn't in the Q2 draft, Malcolm continued. It appeared in the post-merger framework. Likely slipped in during a late-night revision. You were betting we'd be too eager to notice. A rustle moved down the table as some of the senior staff shifted in their seats. One junior analyst's eyes widened. He knew Malcolm was right. He'd seen it, added. Quietly. On a call he was told not to speak during. Harrison's face hardened. The performative warmth was gone now, replaced with something colder, calculation. We're all professionals here, he said. Let's not get dramatic. But Malcolm just tilted his head slightly and smiled. Not with amusement, but certainty. This isn't drama, he said. It's diligence. You brought a chessboard. I brought the endgame. That's when the silence returned. Not the awkward kind, the loaded kind. The kind that comes before someone decides whether to lie, confess, or run. And in that silence, everyone suddenly realized. This wasn't going to be just another deal. This was going to be a reckoning. Malcolm tapped the paper again, slow and deliberate, like a surgeon exposing a tumor no one else wanted to see. The clause states, he said, reading calmly, in perpetuity, VisionSpan shall allocate 40% of gross profits derived from proprietary AI models to Orvaniteca's Intellectual Holdings division. He paused. That's not a licensing agreement. That's a vein, and you're positioning yourselves at the artery. The room recoiled, not physically, but in the subtle ways professionals do when power begins to slip. Tightened jaws, crossed arms, side glances down the table. No one spoke. Finally, one of the executives, Roland Maris, VP of Strategy, leaned forward, fingers steepled. That clause is standard language for strategic alignment. It ensures continuity and shared growth. Malcolm didn't even blink. No, Mr. Maris. What it ensures is that VisionSpan becomes your innovation farm. You collect on what we create, forever. The moment our models hit scale, your share balloons while our runway evaporates. Another executive chimed in, nervous laughter in his voice. Surely that's an exaggeration. We wouldn't sabotage a partner. Malcolm cut in, voice steady. It's not sabotage. It's precision. You knew we'd be looking for buyout language, not lifetime licensing. You wrote it to slip through trust. A legal counsel down the table shuffled her papers and cleared her throat. It's negotiable, she offered weakly. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Clauses meant to protect partnerships don't usually need to be negotiated out. At that moment, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The smiles were gone. The pretense of collaboration frayed. Malcolm had shattered the illusion. What was supposed to be a triumphant final meeting had become a forensic dissection of corporate deceit. And then he dropped the final blow. Not loud, not aggressive, but razor sharp. Do you know what happens when you starve innovation? He asked, looking Harrison locked directly in the eye. It leaves. Quietly. And then it outpaces you. Harrison's lips twitched. His jaw clenched. But he said nothing. Because Malcolm was right. They hadn't come for partnership. They'd come for control, with a contract sharp enough to bleed and quiet enough to go unnoticed. But they hadn't counted on Malcolm Reid. And now, the trap they'd laid had snapped, but on the wrong neck. Silence hovered like fog, thick and awkward, as the executives reeled from Malcolm's calm dismantling of their prized clause. Then, from the far end of the table, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. Okay, but who exactly are you to challenge our legal framework? The question came from Nolan Crisp, Chief Operating Officer, a man known more for his disdain than his diplomacy. The remark wasn't innocent. It was coated in the kind of condescension reserved for people who don't look the part. A few heads nodded subtly. Others looked away. Malcolm didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and slid a slim gray folder across the table. It landed squarely in front of Nolan, who eyed it like it was a trap of its own. Since we're asking questions, Malcolm said coolly, you can start with the front page. Nolan flipped it open, and then paused. His brows furrowed. First line. Malcolm Reid, Strategic Counsel to NASA's Intergovernmental AI Accord Initiative. Second line. Former lead negotiator for the Pan-Pacific Data Rights Treaty. Third. Yale Law, summa cum laude. Fourth. Advisor to 3 Fortune 100 companies during high-stakes antitrust litigation. It wasn't a resume, it was a blueprint of why every trap they'd set was already undone. Around the table, one by one, the executives leaned in. Their faces began to change, smug curiosity melting into something far more unsettled, recognition. "You've been the ghost behind a lot of closed doors," one murmured, almost to himself. Malcolm smiled faintly. "That's the job. I don't do press releases. I do pressure points." Harrison Locke, still holding his CEO composure like a porcelain mask, cleared his throat. "That's impressive, Mr. Reid. But credentials don't change deal structures." Malcolm leaned forward slightly, voice low and firm. "No. But they do explain why I caught your clause in under 7 minutes. And why I've already redlined a cleaner alternative that actually reflects the partnership you claimed to want." He tapped a separate folder, resting just beside his elbow. "This isn't about credentials," he continued. "It's about awareness. You mistook discretion for inexperience. You assumed quiet meant naive." He glanced around the room, gaze steady. "I didn't come here to impress you. I came here to protect VisionSpan from being colonized through paperwork." And just like that, the power dynamic flipped, not with shouting, not with theatrics, but with undeniable clarity. They hadn't invited a lawyer to this meeting. They had invited a reckoning in a navy suit. There's a unique kind of tension that fills a boardroom when the unspoken is finally spoken, when the emperor is told, gently and publicly, that he's not wearing any clothes. That tension now clung to every surface of Orvaniteca's 37th floor conference room. Malcolm Reid sat calmly in the eye of the storm, the exposed clause still highlighted in red on the contract before him. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited, and let the silence do what silence does best, reveal who panics first. Harrison Locke's knuckles tightened around his Mont Blanc pen. Roland Maris, the smug VP from earlier, suddenly seemed very interested in his coffee. The general counsel scribbled furiously into her leather-bound notes. And a junior analyst near the corner, the youngest person in the room, was visibly pale. He knew. He had been on that late-night revision call. He remembered hearing the phrase, "Let's tuck it into a compliance wrapper, they won't catch it." He'd said nothing. He wasn't paid to object. But now, with Malcolm spelling it out line by line, guilt crept across his face like a shadow. Malcolm didn't need to see it. He already knew. He'd seen it before, in rooms like this, in industries from biotech to aerospace. The clause was never an accident. It was a fingerprint. A hand went up. "We're talking about a fraction of projected revenue," said a middle-aged executive wearing a Harvard ring. "Not enough to derail a partnership." Malcolm turned toward him, slow and deliberate. "That fraction becomes 40% of every product we develop from this moment forward. That's not a handshake, that's a handcuff." Harrison leaned forward, voice low. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," Malcolm replied. "I'm putting it in proportion, which is exactly what you didn't expect me to do." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a printed proposal. Clean, fair, thoroughly annotated. "This," he said, "is what a partnership looks like. Not a siphon. Not a cage with golden trim." For a moment, no one moved. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the shift began. One executive nodded. Another glanced at Harrison, then back at Malcolm. The general counsel stopped writing. The boardroom had started to fracture. Not just because of the clause, but because the illusion of control had cracked. And when control slips in a room like that, the empire starts whispering. "What else did we miss?" someone murmured. The answer was clear. Too much. And one man had just pulled back the curtain. In every corporate power structure, there's an invisible moment when the air changes, When people stop looking at the CEO for answers and start glancing at someone else. That moment had just arrived. Malcolm Reid didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to make threats. He simply held the room with the clarity of a man who saw the board 5 moves ahead. The printed proposal he'd placed in front of them now gleamed beneath the conference room lights, crisp, annotated, and watermarked with VisionSpan's logo. It wasn't just a counteroffer, it was a reminder. Malcolm hadn't come to react. He had come prepared. And they weren't. The General Counsel, Helen Strauss, broke the silence first. "We should review this," she said slowly, cautiously. "Some of these terms are reasonable," Malcolm interjected, locking eyes with her. "They're reasonable, transparent, and most importantly, reciprocal. I'm not asking for concessions. I'm asking for integrity." That last word hit harder than most insults would have. Integrity wasn't just a word. In that room, with those executives, it was a mirror, and some of them couldn't bear to look into it. A director of engineering leaned forward, intrigued. "Clause 12B, you're offering shared R&D for the next 18 months? Malcolm nodded. "Correct. Under a joint IP trust. You get access to our tech. We retain equity in ours. No siphoning. No surprises." Even those who'd once dismissed him were now flipping through the pages of his proposal like it held water in a desert. Because it did. And suddenly, the mood began to shift, again. Not by force. By logic. By foresight. By someone in the room who had actually done his homework. But at the head of the table, Harrison Locke sat frozen. His silence was no longer composed, it was cracked porcelain. His executives were slipping from his orbit, drawn to a gravitational force he hadn't anticipated. Finally, he spoke. "You think you can walk in here and dictate terms?" Malcolm didn't flinch. "I didn't walk in to dictate," he said, voice calm but cutting. "I walked in to level the field. If that feels like a threat, maybe you're standing on the wrong side of it." That line didn't just land. It echoed. Because the truth was now unmistakable. Malcolm wasn't in that room to impress anyone. He was in that room to reset the balance. And the room was already tilting in his direction. Harrison Locke's smile was gone. The poised veneer he wore so meticulously now cracked like aged glass. The room, once filled with polite nods and rehearsed confidence, now bristled with unease. For the first time in years, Harrison felt something unfamiliar creeping beneath his tailored suit, vulnerability. He cleared his throat, voice strained but still commanding. "Mr. Reid, your concerns are noted. But business is built on trust and risk. VisionSpan's technology is valuable, and your demands, while thorough, risk undermining the synergy we hoped to achieve." Malcolm leaned forward slightly, the calm storm in the room. "Respectfully, Mr. Locke, the only risk here is underestimating VisionSpan's worth. We didn't come to be acquired. We came to be partners. Partners who aren't boxed in by fine print that eviscerates their future." Harrison's gaze flicked to the other executives. Some avoided eye contact. Others exchanged quick, furtive glances. The narrative Harrison had carefully constructed, the narrative that he held all the cards, was unraveling. Suddenly, a new voice rose, steady and firm. It was Helen Strauss, the General Counsel, whose legal expertise had seemed aligned with Orvaniteka's interests just moments ago. "Mr. Locke, the clause Malcolm flagged isn't just a risk, it's a liability. If it passes, it sets a precedent that could trigger shareholder action against the board. This isn't just bad business, it's reckless." Harrison's lips pressed into a thin line. He swallowed his pride but refused to surrender. "Fine," he said, voice low. "We will revisit the terms. But I want to be clear, VisionSpan is fortunate to have us. This is not charity." Malcolm smiled, a spark of triumph but no malice. "Fortunate, perhaps. But fortune is a two-way street. Partnerships aren't about one side taking, they're about both sides building." The room's atmosphere shifted palpably. The executives started pulling out their tablets and laptops, opening documents, debating quietly among themselves. The momentum had shifted irreversibly. The balance of power was tilting away from the gilded CEO's grip and into the steady hands of the man who had dared to say, "This clause is a trap." Harrison Locke sat back, the first genuine shadow crossing his face. For all his experience, all his savvy, he hadn't accounted for Malcolm Reid, the man who didn't just negotiate, but who saw the game in ways no one else did. And now, the game was changing. The final echoes of debate faded into a heavy silence, the kind that signals something monumental just happened, something irreversible. Malcolm Reid stood, closing his folder with a deliberate snap that reverberated like a gavel in the room. Eyes that once doubted now fixed on him with reluctant respect. The man who walked into the lion's den with nothing but a sharp eye and sharper instincts had not only survived, he'd rewritten the rules of engagement. Harrison Locke's posture had shifted from dominant to defensive. The CEO who once commanded with ease now looked like a man measuring his next move in shadows, no longer sure if the path ahead led to victory or ruin. "This is not just about contracts," Malcolm said, voice steady, resonant with authority. "It's about respect. VisionSpan's innovation isn't a commodity to be mined. It's a legacy to be built together." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The clause was a test," Malcolm continued. "A test of character, of integrity, of true partnership. And it failed." The room absorbed the truth in different ways. Some faces flushed with shame. Others nodded in agreement. But all understood that the game had shifted. Helen Strauss spoke quietly but firmly. "I will initiate a full review of all clauses to ensure fairness and transparency. No more traps. No more surprises." The executives exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement that the old ways were breaking. Harrison Locke finally stood, extending a hand to Malcolm. It was more than a gesture, it was a concession, a tacit promise to recalibrate the balance of power. Malcolm shook it without hesitation. "This isn't the end," Malcolm said. "It's the beginning of a partnership where VisionSpan leads on innovation and Orvani Tech supports without shackles." As he gathered his things, the room's energy shifted from confrontation to cautious optimism. The executives saw a new vision forming, one built on respect, fairness, and mutual benefit. Outside, the city's skyline shimmered against the setting sun, a silent witness to the deal that almost broke but didn't. Because sometimes, the strongest deals aren't just signed with pens, they're signed with courage. Malcolm Reid walked out of the conference room that day not just as VisionSpan's counsel, but as the architect of a new era. The clause that was meant to trap instead sparked a reckoning, one that reshaped not only contracts but the very culture of partnership. And for everyone involved, the lesson was clear. Integrity isn't negotiable. It's the foundation. And it always wins in the end. In the end, it wasn't just a contract that was rewritten, it was the rules of the game. Because when you stand firm on integrity, no trap is too clever, and no deal is too big to challenge. Malcolm Reid didn't just protect a company, he changed the future of partnership forever.